think we can all safely say that 2020 has not been necessarily pleasant to anybody, especially us. With coronavirus and even the entertainment world and industry, all of our movies have been just kind of here, there, everywhere. They're not going to the movies, they're going to streaming services, and they're just being thrown around all over the place. But that does not necessarily mean that we have not been given good horror movies in 2020. More specifically, The Invisible Man. Now, The Invisible Man is most definitely a remake, but a remake of a movie that didn't come out till very, very, very early in the 1900s, so I think it's definitely overdue. But this movie surprised me in a lot of ways. I was not expecting this movie to be as truly terrifying as it was. So, first off, this movie already is pretty complicated to do anyway because your main antagonist is completely invisible. So I was definitely curious to see how they were going to go around that without it making absolutely no sense. Because if you just had a random guy out here chasing after a woman who just so happened to be invisible, no one's going to take that seriously. They needed to have a backstory. And they definitely delivered with this movie. It is centered around a crazed optic engineer who is extremely abusive to his lovely wife, Cecilia. And so the movie opens up, she gets her things, and she escapes. And then the crazed scientist fakes his death, uses an invisible suit that he created because he's a scientist, and he begins to stalk her. Her as in Cecilia. Well, obviously no one's going to believe her, because who's going to believe anybody that says, hey, an invisible man is chasing me? No one. Which is perfect. So, you have a extremely deep-rooted storyline to give you kind of a backstory on why this dude is just running around invisible, torturing this poor Cecilia. Now, obviously, that story is not going to work out if Cecilia does not play her part as the strong, independent, final girl of the film. Wow, is all I can say about that. Elizabeth Moss kills it in this movie, and that's the name of the actress who plays Cecilia. And I mean, she nailed it. I mean, I give her infinite praise for this role specifically because just the emotion that you can sense with her, like you definitely sympathize with this character 100%. You see her going through it. And even, subtle things, they make sure to show just the tiredness in her eyes, and they begin to, be more red and droopy, and just her overall complexion throughout the movie completely changes, just as you see her slowly getting broke down as Adrian, aka the Invisible Man, is chasing her into madness quite literally. Now, you can't just go and base this movie off of solely acting, because there's a lot more to it than that. So we go to the camera work. Now, it's kind of difficult to film any type of struggle or horror scene when you can't see who is supposed to be scaring you. And that's one of the reasons why I was kind of skeptical to watch this movie, and also why I waited so long before I actually watched it, is because I'm like, okay, how are you going to scare the audience with someone who is completely invisible? Well, they definitely use trick of the hand and really, really creepy camera shots, which consisted of looking at nothing at some points. Now, I know this sounds kind of backwards, because you're like, well, how am I going to get scared looking at anything or nothing? Because there's nothing to look at. You're looking at an empty space where you think Adrian might be standing, or he might not be standing there. You never really know throughout the movie which times he's actually there and when he's actually not there. So that gives a sense of anxiety and stress all to itself, because here you are watching a movie and you're like, is that him? I don't know. And so you just kind of have to go back and forth, and they do really, really good at making you believe he's there the whole time. But again, you're never going to know. And of course, you cannot have a good scary movie without a really good score. And the score can make or break a movie. I mean, perfect example, if you watched the original Halloween with no score, it's going to be a pretty bland movie, folks. You're not going to enjoy it as much as you would if it had the score. Now, if you have a film who, once again, the main character is invisible, how are you going to create a score that's also going to leave the audience in question whether or not something's about to happen or not? Well, perfect. This movie had a blend of silence and score, but the score that they would use, it was never, you didn't have a lot of long drawn out scores. It was either silent or boom. There was no in between, and they did that on purpose, because if you think about it, the more silence you have leading up to these events, it's just going to build the anticipation for something to happen. Perfect example, in my opinion, which is the best scene in this movie, but it also showed it in the trailer, is when Cecilia is in the attic and she dumps the white paint down and Adrian's right there and the paint, goes all over the suit. Perfect scene right there, in my opinion. I jumped. So, I mean, A plus for that. If I jumped, then, that's pretty good. Because you're just not expecting that. I mean, in all seriousness, how scared would you be if you poured white paint and there was just a face right in front of you? That would be terrifying. So to see them, be creative with those scenes was super, super fulfilling to me. Now, even though I just spent way too much time talking about all the things I liked about this movie, there are a couple things that I do dislike, or that I wish they would have improved on. So, for example, even though I really, really enjoy the backstory behind why these events are taking place, I wish we could have had more of an in-depth look, excuse me, of what Cecilia was truly going through in that relationship. Now, mind you, they tell you little bits and pieces throughout the film, but it's kind of difficult to gravitate towards Cecilia at the beginning, because you're like, okay, all I saw was her grab her things and run away. So, you got a nice house, which is, couldn't have been that bad, which is not true, but I'm saying when you're starting the movie, you're kind of in the middle of a huge situation. You're not really sure where this is stemming from. So I really wish we could have spent more time with Adrian and Cecilia as a couple to see what exactly drove her and him to do the things that they did. And where did this suit come from? They give no, absolutely zero clue as to why he made the suit, what the suit's for, and then everyone else is like, well, I don't know what suit you're talking about. And here's my thing. He is a famous optics engineer. You're meaning to tell me that nobody knows about an invisible suit? Seems a little too comic bookish to me, but I can look past it. But it's still kind of annoying, because you wanted to see where the origin of this came from. Why was he crazy? Show us things to show us how he's crazy. Not just him running around in an invisible suit. We kind of need that backstory, if you know what I'm saying. And the final complaint that I have of this film is that I really wish we had a more climactic final scene. I'm not going to say what the scene is or how it transpires, because this is still a fairly recent movie, and there's plenty of people that probably have not watched it, so I don't want to necessarily give too many spoilers away. But the final scene kind of fell flat for me. I know you were supposed to get a sense of revenge, but I didn't really get the full effect of that due to the ending. It didn't spoil the whole movie for me. It's like the whole movie was an A or a B, and then the ending was a C. And I'm like, oh, nobody wants to, waste an hour and 45 minutes just to get to the ending and it be kind of mediocre at best. That's just my opinion, so just take it with a grain of salt. But that was the only other issue that I had with this movie. Other than that, it's definitely worth the watch. If you haven't watched it, please do. I think it is a wonderful remake of the original, and I think they did a really good job putting a modern twist on it, that will definitely scare you. It caused me a lot of stress, enough so to where I had to pause it a few times because I'm like, this should not be stressing me out this bad. But it did. So that's just my thoughts on 2020's Invisible Man, which is probably the only thing I can say about this year that's going to have any good thoughts attached to it. So check this movie out, watch it, like and subscribe to my channel because more content always coming. And who knows, we might do another new movie that I haven't seen yet, and we'll just pop that up on the YouTube. But other than that, that just about covers my review of The Invisible Man. And just remember, you keep watching scary movies, and I'll keep talking about them.